So now we're going to start dealing with this wall of red. All of these nasty little errors that we get back from our content security policy. And we'll start with the biggest problem first, which is the fact we're using a CDN to get our semantic UI CSS. And we don't have to use a CDN for this. And what we can do is we can simply go and install the semantic UI CSS package from npm. And that way we'll be serving our styles from the server itself rather than going out to a CDN to get them. So I'm just going to go back to the semantic UI documentation, and what we can do rather than using the CDN is we can actually install semantic UI CSS. So I'm just going to grab that into my clipboard, and what we'll do is we'll just go and open a new session and make sure we CD into our client app for this, and I'm just going to run npm install and paste in semantic UI CSS. And this gives us semantic UI CSS 2.4.1. It is slightly behind the CDN version, but it shouldn't give us any problems. And if I just go back to the documentation again, what we need to add is an import for the semantic UI CSS, and we need to add this to our index.tsx file. So I'll just go across and open up the index.tsx, and we'll just add this above our styles.css, and then what we can do is go to our index.html, and we can remove the link to get this from the CDN. And what we'll also need to do is rebuild our production version of our React application and push it into our API's www root folder. Now, because we didn't do anything clever with the package.json, and all we're doing is simply moving these files into the www root folder, what we'll need to do is just delete this particular folder, and I'll just move this to trash from our API. And then what we can do is open up our terminal window, and we can once again run npm run build, and this will publish all of our React files back into that www root folder. So I'll just run that again. And once this is complete, what we'll need to do then is just stop and restart our server. So I'll just run .NET run and point it at the API project again. And let's go back and check and see how we're doing. And I'll go back to my browser and I'll just refresh this page. And we're now down to 23. And this is where we start playing whack-a-mole with different errors we get back from this particular policy. And now that we've brought our style sheet into our application, there's also stuff inside that style sheet that goes and imports things like the fonts from Google APIs. And we've also got our images that we need to take care of as well, because these are always going to come from Cloudinary, and we know this is a safe place to get our images from. So we can also specify this particular URL inside our application as well to say that we're okay with getting images from this location. And I'm just going to copy the URL that we get from here and add this to my whitelist inside the content security policy, because what we're doing here is saying that we're whitelisting any of the content that we're displaying on our page at the moment. And anything that isn't on our whitelist simply won't be loaded in our application, because if we didn't have this in report only, then we wouldn't be seeing our application at the moment. And let's go back and start adding some changes to our policy here so that we can also add some different options. And we're starting with and this is a style sheet as well, so we need to specify the location of this in here. And what we can do, as well as the style sources of self, we can also chain on additional sources, and we'll add a custom source, and we'll specify that we're okay with getting our style sheet from fonts.googleapis.com. And if we go back and in fact, we'll need to restart the server again. So I'm just going to stop this, and I'm just going to CD into the API and do a .NET watch run, because we'll make several changes here, and each time we'll just restart our server so that we can see the effects of the changes. And once this is started, let's just refresh our page again. And fine, we're down to 22 errors. And what we'll do next is we'll also get the the font URL as well, and this is coming from fonts.gstatic.com. So we'll also add this one, but this one will add to our fonts. And let's go to our font sources and we'll specify custom sources. And I'll just paste in this particular URL. Our app should restart, and then we should be able to see a reduced number of errors from this particular policy. So I'll just refresh the page again. And now we're down to 14, so we're making progress. And if we take a look at this one, then this one's a bit weird because it's a data application font. So we also need to specify data and colon to get around this particular violation. And we'll add this as an additional custom source. So we'll specify data and colon and save. And once the app has restarted, let's just refresh the page again. And now we're down to 6, so we're definitely making progress. We'll also add the Cloudinary URL so that we'll say that we're okay with getting images from here. And we'll specify this in the image sources, and we'll say custom sources, and we'll just paste in the Cloudinary URL. And once the app has restarted, we'll just go back and check for improvements. And now we're down to 3 errors. Real progress. And there's a couple of things now we need to take care of. So what we've got here is 2 pieces of inline things really. We have an inline style and an inline script. Now the inline script, if we take a look at the elements, then this is coming from Webpack, and we're going to need to allow this one individual script to run in our application. And what the content security policy provides for us is it gives this particular script a hash version of this script. So it's only going to allow this very specific script to run on our or run inside our browser, and we can specify this using the inline or the hash here. And what we can do is we can copy this into our clipboard, and this is going to allow us to run this one specific inline script, and it won't allow any other inline scripts to run inside our browser. So what we can do is we can take a copy of this, and I'll just go back to VS Code, and what we want to do is for our script sources we want to specify a custom source, and we'll paste in this hash as our source in this case. And if we just go back to the browser once this is restarted again and just refresh the page, now we're down to a single problem. And this is the annoying one, because this is telling us that we've got an inline style, and this is taking place in our index.html file. And if I just go back to our code and let's just take a look at the index.html, then what we have in here is a single inline style with a display flex, and we're using this just as our initial content before we replace this with our React application. But to get around this is kind of irritating, because if we try and do the same thing that we did for our inline script, and I just copy the hash and I go back to my startup class, and let's just add this as an additional custom source. So same thing we're doing for the script source down here, we're also doing it for our style as well. And if we just wait for our app to restart, but if I go back to the browser, what we'll find is that it didn't make any difference. We've still got the same problem, and even though the hash has been applied, and if we take a look at the network and take a look at our activities, and we take a look at our content security policy report, then we can see that we've got the hash listed inside here. But the problem is, and this is where it's a little bit annoying, is that if we go back to our index.html file and take a look at this, then the style that's given us a problem is this inline style inside here. And content security policies, when it's a style that's an inline attribute to a element, then the hash whitelisting doesn't work. So basically, content security policy doesn't work when the style is written in this way. And what we need to do to get around this And I'm just going to add a custom class that shouldn't conflict with anything else inside here. I'm going to call it Active Spinner, and I'm going to add an inline style inside the body of this page, and I'm just going to say style. And what I'm going to do is specify .ActiveSpinner, and inside here we're just going to use the display flex and important, and then I can remove this attribute style from this div, and this style will be applied to our class here. Now this is annoying because we now need to rebuild our application again. I'm just going to go back to the API, delete the www root folder once again, move this to trash, go back to another session and rebuild our React application. And once this is rebuilt, we'll just go back to our server and we'll just give this a restart just to make sure it's picked up the static file changes. This is the reason I left security right till the end, because security is annoying and it's always a pain. So let's just go back to our browser again. I'll just refresh the page again. So with that in place, what we should be able to do now is copy this new hash, which we get here, not this one, but the one that's specified here. We'll copy this into our clipboard and we'll go back to our startup class and we'll replace our hash with this one and wait for our app to restart. And what we should find is that now we can refresh our page, and finally we've done it. We're down to one specific error, and this is only delivering this in report only mode. But we still have one more to correct, and that's not visible on this list at the moment. But if I go into my profile and I attempt to go to the photos and I attempt to add a photo, and I'll just try and drop an image in here, then what we get is another report only, and it's refusing to load the blob in this case because it violates the content security policy. So what we also need to do for our images is also add this one to our image source, and let's just go back, and inside the image sources what we'll also do is add another custom source, and we'll specify blob and column, and this should allow us to add images as blobs, and it's the preview of the image that we're getting stuck with here. But once this is enabled, what we should be able to do, I'll just refresh this page, is go to the photos and click on add photo, and we should be able to drag an image in, and we still get one more in this case, and it's given us this data problem. So we also need to add the data to our images as well. Even though everything looks fine here, we're still going to get this warning coming from our cropper. So let's just add the data in there as well. And try this again. And if I just refresh the page again, we'll go back to our photos and add a photo, and let's try this one more time, and this time we get success. So with all of these in place, now we've fixed our security policy. So what we can do now is go back to our startup class, and instead of using use CSP report only, we can use CSP without just being the reports. Now that we've got all of our security headers in place, and we should be able to go back to our browser and refresh, and now we get a working application, and we've got all of our security headers being returned to us from the application server, including our new painful to implement content security policy. And what we can do now is we can rebuild or republish our .NET application, and we can redeploy it to our Linux server. So I'm just going to go back to the VS Code, and what we want to do is just stop our application once again. I'm just going to cd up into the reactivities folder, and what we want to do is find the command where we published our application before, and we're just going to rerun this particular command to republish our application. And once this is completed, then we're going to redeploy it to our Linux server. So I'm just going to use the deploy reloaded function again and deploy the package, And this is going to send all of those files up to our Linux server. And this is going to take a few minutes. So I'm just going to pause the video and come back once this is complete. So now this has been deployed to our Linux server. Let's go, and we'll need to restart the Kestrel service on that particular server. So let's just go back to the Linux server and just grab the scripts we were using earlier to set up our Linux server. And what we want to do is just grab the one to start the Kestrel web service, or we're actually going to restart it. So I'm just going to copy this into my clipboard, and instead of saying start, we want to restart in this case. We need to do this, otherwise we'll just be using the previous version of our application. So this is going to restart our API, and we should be able to browse to our application once again. So let's just take a look. Make sure our application is still working first of all. And this looks good, so I'm just going to make sure there's no errors in the console. And the console is clean. But the real test is what happens when we test this in our security headers. So I'm just going to go back to this particular tab, paste in the URL and hit the scan button, and we get a B, which is kind of disappointing. But don't forget, we're not using HTTPS here, so it's going to be difficult to get an A rating when we're just using HTTP instead of HTTPS. And if we take a look at what the warnings are, we've got this missing header for a feature policy, but this is so new it doesn't make any difference to our security rating. The reason we're getting the B grade is that the site is served over HTTP, but if we take a look at all of our additional information, we've got a lot of green now, and that's pretty good. And I'm just going to go and do the same thing, but for the version of this application that I do have with HTTPS, just so that I can show you that you can get an A rating from what we've done.